to start off by once again welcoming in the last of the Americans, James Faraci. Welcome to the show once more.
Glad to be back on.
And so the thing here we've decided to bring him on here is, for those not aware, this is, I believe, the 10th anniversary of Mr. Faraci starting up his own text-based blog internet review series, The Last of the Americans. He was wanting to come on to commemorate this particular edition. I guess first I just want to ask you, I might as well tell the audience, what exactly got you into creating your own series in this particular format?
Oh, basically because I didn't know how to do video. I didn't know how to make a lot of things happen yet. That's why I'm in college now, to make these things happen, to make the videos happen, turn it into videos and all that.
Well, I'm gonna give you this one piece of advice here, just from my own experience. Anything they probably teach you in these classes is definitely something to remember on. But one thing that you probably should learn that you might not be able to get in any of these classes. Try to learn as many different types of software programs as you can, because I can tell you from experience, my time studying print journalism in college, they got me trained. Most of the classes I took got me trained on stuff like Adobe PageMaker, which I think all you need to know is I'm not even sure that program is even published out anymore, if it's even really in existence. And in fact, once I actually started looking for jobs in the field, even as just a copy editor, I began finding out that they were using whole other programs besides PageMaker. So I think that's the advice I would give to you. Like, when I started out, because I was mainly using Mac computers, I first started using iMovie, which I believe it was, and that was just like trial by error, on the job training there, before eventually moving on to Adobe Premiere Pro. I know some other people use Vegas and the like, so just my advice would be to read up and study up on as many type of like software editing programs that you think of, and when that time comes, ultimately try to find what works best for you. That's just the best advice I could probably give you.
Thank you for that advice. I'm actually taking a video production and workshop course this semester along with Media and Society, so that'll help.
Okay, so what you wanted me to do here was that you did in fact ask me to probably suggest to you, looking back on all the many text-based reviews you've done over these 10 years, and pick out you originally wanted me to present you like a top 10 list or so. Unfortunately, with all of my extremely busy schedule, because I've been trying my best to roll out, complete as many videos as possible. If I could get at least all of the Patreon reviews finished for the rest of the year by the end of this month, I'd really like to do that. So because of that and a whole bunch of other things, I apologize that I probably wasn't able to go back and look once again over all of your reviews and come out with 10, but I am going to at least give you a at least probably what I will believe were my 5 best, and then I'll have something for you later on in that. So
cool.
I also want to point out that these aren't necessarily in a particular order, except maybe for the last one that I'll mention here. But I'll probably just give you probably looking back over what I believe were probably some of the favorites. I'm going to start with your list of the craziest Christmas specials. And I think one of the things is you did list a lot of ones that I think quite a few people may have known about as well. But what it did was, I like to think it actually inspired me to start looking and hunting down even more of these. And in fact, I'll just give you a sneak preview. Starting in November, all of my Patreon reviews are going to be of animated Christmas specials. And in fact, I've dug up so many that I actually had to completely reschedule, and probably I'm gonna have to hold some of these off for next year even. Some of the main ones I've dug up, and some ones that may be so obscure you won't maybe not have heard of them. But I do think looking over yours and probably others' reviews of Christmas specials is one of the things that probably inspired me to try to dig up even more of these, and it's helped me find a lot more stuff that I'm going to have available to review over the next couple of years at least.
Okay. Well,
Now,
I come up with this list because I knew I had to do another countdown type deal before it's actually the last one of those Christmas countdown lists I could do willingly because I had no idea. I'd run out of ideas for another top 12. So that's ultimately what led me in 2019 to come up with the Christmas gift guide, as well as the Siskel and Ebert stuff.
right. So I'll move on here. I guess one of the next ones I'm going to admit I really liked was your Connect the Plots episode involving Superboy and the Adventures of Lois and Clark. Couple reasons for this one. One thing, I'm going to admit that Superboy is one of those that has been on my own list of future reviews for quite some time now, and I just have not come up with the right time to pull the switch, get the episodes, and look over it. Also, I'm going to admit that, despite the unfortunate, and I won't get into much of this because you know my issues on politics in my videos and stuff.
Absolutely.
Some of the unfortunate reveals we found out about its star, I still kind of really liked the Adventures of Lois and Clark, especially for the pilot. In fact, I've always wanted to do, I actually did seriously consider doing a review on at least the pilot episode of that series for one particular reason, because I thought that episode, and in essence the series in general, did a far much better job establishing how Clark and his family figure out how to deal with the issue of how does he use his abilities to help others and keep his own safety and identity secret and everything. Far much better job than, let's just say, a certain other Superman movie that's been far discussed much on the internet now.
Oh, I know what movie you're talking about because I had to talk about it for my 10th anniversary review. And, but when I did the Connect the Plots, it was because I was rewatching these episodes again. Partly it sparked in my head something that I didn't think of while I was watching the episodes the first time around, the Superboy show and Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Because if I had looked at things analytically as I did then, as I do now, I could tell you, I probably wouldn't have made the. Actually, I did post this more recently in a Superman and / Superboy's TV series fandom page on Facebook, and they were like, "Yeah, this is pretty good. This is actually, you actually came up with a solid theory."
Well, I'm going to say this, absolutely. Just for hearing that, I'm actually very pleased to hear that you actually shared an opinion on something in a Facebook group and got mostly positive reactions to it. I've been having kind of the opposite effect with some of the things I've been saying on some Texas Rangers fan groups, and we'll just not say no more on that. That's for a whole other topic for another discussion. So I'll just move forward and go on here. Another one that I really found myself liking was more or less the crossover review you did with our other old friend Duke CT Charles Thomas reviewing The Rocketeer, which, yes, I have to believe is one of the most underappreciated superhero comic book movies ever made. I don't know if you were one of those, because again, I always say I'm one of the fogies on the internet and everything, but this is one I fully remember watching in theaters and just being blown away by it. Absolutely.
I actually missed out on it in theaters. Lord help me, I tried to watch it in theaters, but I had been busy with so much at that point in time in my life, so VHS became a good way for me to watch movies. And I actually liked part of the story behind the thing,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, oh, James is having troubles with his relationship right from the gate, right from the get go, and it's like, of course he's having these type of things. And for me to accidentally just forget about Duke CT while I was working on my Superman 3 review with Gus the Nostalgia Kid Webb and uh, writer's block Jeff Gwinnett, it was like, whoops.
Well, I'm just gonna,
And
yeah, I'm just gonna say that, again, I'm just glad to see anyone give that movie in particular any due exposure and review on it, because when you look back at it, first off, that the cast and crew they assembled, even for back then, is pretty amazing. The fact that it was directed by future Captain America director Joe Johnston, who, by the way, also, yes, I come to realize, directed at least one episode of the Young Indiana Jones TV series before that gone in. And then you get a cast that, yeah, Bill Campbell was okay, but you also get Alan Arkin, Jennifer Connelly, Timothy Dalton, and all that. And it really is amazing just how much that movie almost essentially was a launching pad for a lot of stars in Hollywood of that time. The only thing I guess I was kind of a bit disappointed in the review was you didn't specifically point out what I believe was the single greatest line in the history of cinema to come out of that movie. And that was when Mr. Valentine himself says, I may not make an honest buck, but I'm 100% American.
oh, I actually did mention that.
I must have missed it again. I know you point out how they turned, how the mob, how of course how him and the mob turn the tables and start fighting the Nazis with the feds, which of course is very much truth in reality. Of course, for those not aware, the mafia was a huge asset in helping the feds and the military root out Nazi spies during World War II in real life. So there was they took inspiration from real life American history for that particular plot point.
Well, now I know.
I guess we can move on here and yeah.
One last thing I wanted to
Absolutely.
say before about this, because it was the first one that actually kind of like explored Julia Alexa Miller or Alex Liquid Verve Miller's superpowers that were imbued to her at the end of the 5th year anniversary. I really wanted to know what it'd be like, and so Duke came up with some of the great stuff.
Yeah.
So thanks, Duke.
Yeah. Well, so moving on here, this next one, I'm going to say, at least from an objective standpoint, I might say this is the one where I may have been most impressed with your creative writing style. And that would be with your review of The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Where just, I'm going to say, a lot of those parody songs you came up with, some pretty creative stuff there.
Thanks. Partially, I have Steve Kidd for helping me kind of like smooth some parts out, but a lot of it was pretty good. I was saying to myself, this has to work, because I loved this movie back in my late teens, early 20s, before I became an uncle, and I actually did have, and it was really good that the people who were working with me were willing to just go along. Taylor Huff, Marcella, who I recently discovered is married, Mazel Tov and L'chaim to her. And for me to come up with the con stuff and the storyline to work off that movie, it kind of like set a precedent for myself that I have to be as good as that in terms of when I could come up with a musical number or a musical storyline. And it's worked.
I'm glad. This. I'm going to confess I've never actually seen that movie in full so far as of yet. However, of course, I do have one real big connection to it in the fact that when I was in theater school, anytime we had some type of school dance, Time Warp had to be played at some point in time in every one of these school dances. There was basically two things that had to be played at every dance or similar function from my theater school. And that was the Time Warp and pretty much the entire soundtrack from Grease.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But meanwhile,
Yeah.
if you want me to tell you what probably was my favorite, that Last of the Americans text review, this probably isn't gonna surprise you that much. And that would probably be your review of Sleeping Beauty that happened to guest star some absolute loudmouth jackass whose name escapes me.
Oh yes, the first ever crossover we've ever done. I was so glad that you were just willing to get out. But also, it was one of the most raw reviews I had done at that point. It was like really early on in the. I mean, I was like literally a couple months in the job, and I kind of. Wow, that does take me back because.
Well, you did give me an opportunity to probably vent on one movie that, I've had my own personal issues with, even though, like I've always said, Merryweather remains one of my favorite characters from the Disney universe, period, but just about everything else, it's just, there's just so many major plot holes and everything that kind of, I think it survives on nostalgia more than just about anything else. And again, just the fact that that they were plot holes that I found were handled much better in future movies like Aladdin and everything. And I mean, I was telling the absolute truth when I said I had issues with Sleeping Beauty even before when I first saw it, years before Aladdin even came out. And then when I saw them handle those similar situations, I thought, yeah, this is done much better. Even back then as a kid, it was just something that kind of was always on my mind. And that was this one area where I was finally able to vent out my beliefs on them, so to speak.
Yeah, and my reaction to when Maleficent becomes that big, gigantic dragon thing, that was my actual honest-to-God reaction when I first saw it as a kid on VHS. It was like, I got scared at quite a few movies from my childhood. Superman 3, that moment in which the character of Vera becomes a robot, that scarred me. And of course, Judge Doom becoming discovering that Judge Doom is a toon, that kind of gave me, that was like, well, thank you. I didn't need to sleep for the next 5 years or so.
Hey, you think those things are scary? I got 3 words for you. Return to Oz!
Do you understand that I got a Vietnam flashback while working on my Blockers review, the movie that starred John Cena in an American Pie-esque comedy, to that moment of Judge Doom?
Perhaps. But anyway, so that's okay. So I basically given you my picks for the 5 best editions of The Last of the Americans. So I'm gonna fire it back at you now. I'm just curious, maybe for my own ego, which maybe sometimes is a boost here. How about we get your 5 favorite episodes of TV trash?
Okay, well, if I'm gonna start, they're not in any particular order.
No problem.
But the first one I want to talk about is the 1995 Get Smart review.
Yes.
It was the first review of yours I actually saw. And it was kind of like the gateway to me getting to know you and getting to have all these ideas come out.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, so that was a big thing for me because, like, as I probably mentioned, the original Get Smart was one of my favorite shows growing up because I basically grew up on Nick at Night reruns back in my youth. And I always remembered, like, visions in my mind that there was some type of sequel series going on back around the 1990s, to the point where sometimes I would think back about it and say, did I just dream that or whatnot or anything?
Oh, I actually, I actually at times thought, did I actually think Andy Dick was the star of Get Smart, or
Right.
was I just
And then, yeah, I
like
was finally able to get my hands on those episodes and realize, yeah, this thing existed, and yeah, it's not good. Yeah, putting in Andy Dick. I'm still trying to remember, did Andy Dick do this before or after News Radio? And
before? It
yeah,
was
yeah.
definitely before.
At the very least, in News Radio, Andy Dick was not the central character. He was surrounded by enough other actually good personalities that it that his own annoyance, shall we say, to put it nicely, was minimized as much as possible. But yeah, the sequel series to Get Smart was definitely a very much disappointment to me, especially because of the fact that that it was following up one of my favorite shows ever. And it's actually one that for one that was one of my very earlier reviews, it's actually not one of the ones I didn't have on a first starting list of what I was going to review first and foremost, but it's just when I remembered it relatively shortly after I started up the show, so when I realized, yeah, I gotta do this thing.
Okay, the next one I want to talk about is the Superman timeline.
Aha!
That was one of the best episodes you've done.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think that actually Huey Toonmore was one of the ones who inspired me to do that. I think he was the one who specifically wanted me to look at the 1980s Ruby Spears version of Superman, which I actually remembered seeing like one or two episodes of as a kid. And when I saw that, I remembered how many different shows involving Superman there have been over the years. Realized this is something I can start up and maybe just do all of them at once and show how the character has evolved over the years, so to speak, more or less. So yeah, that one definitely took a lot of research and work to do on it. It's probably the best why it probably was all for the best. It was one to start a new year on, because I had already completed everything. There was a point at the end of the previous year. I forget, was that it would have been like, I think around the end of 2013. I think it was, more or less, where I'd completed everything else for that year, and especially it was difficult because I'm pretty sure that was when I had to move out of my apartment and move back to my parents' house for a brief time. So at the very least, I had some time to try to put everything together and could wait quite a bit to finally make sure everything was done and get it put to get and release it at a good enough time. But yeah, that was at least I am figured that was probably as good a one as any to start the TV timeline sub series, as it was, and that thing will come back eventually. Let's just say I've got plans to maybe start 2024 with another TV timeline series. Let's just put it that way.
Cool. All right. So the next one, this actually is the one. It's a 2-for-1 deal. JFK Lee Harvey Oswald.
Oh yes.
Yes. I mean, believe it or not, I actually did your entire bit at the end when we just took a deep breath, and you went full bore about how Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter, and I had said that whole thing in a speech for my speech class, because they were doing all these theories, and one of them was the Kennedy assassination, and so I decided I was going to nip it in the bud. And when I screamed out, "Oliver Stone, you are failure," and I went back to my chair, there was silence for 2 minutes straight until the teacher said, okay, who wants to work with him? And the first person
Yes.
who
That well
spoke
that
after the teacher had spoken, he was like, this girl was like, I don't want to work with him.
But oh yeah, that one was definitely very personal for me because back when I was a young teenager, and especially living here in North Texas where the whole tragedy went down and everything, that was something that was very much got interest in, and it actually started with me seeing that episode of Quantum Leap. And it was really from watching that episode that I learned about how many so-called conspiracy theories there were about this thing. And then I eventually read, of course, the book Case Closed by Gerald Posner, which went into further detail as to dismissing how so many conspiracies couldn't have worked, what type of person Lee Harvey Oswald always was, and everything up to how, more or less, proving Occam's razor as far as the Kennedy assassination goes, where the simplest solution is usually the best. And so basically, especially once when I found, so I always had had issues with Oliver Stone's JFK, and even when I finally sucked it up and watched it, and then when I found out that the entire reason that episode of Quantum Leap was made was because Donald Belisario himself had so many issues with the conspiracy theories, especially because he actually was one of the few people who got to meet Oswald in person when they were in the Marines together. Everything just kind of fell into place where I said, okay, I've never really done a major review on a motion picture before. But if I could, especially one that I really, really don't like, but if I can tie it in to a review of a television episode, yeah, this is a whole mini-series, so to speak, that could really, really work for me. And yeah, that is definitely one of the ones I may be most proud of for the most part. And I'm just thankful that I finally was able to salvage the full copy video of the JFK review, because I know I had a lot of problems re-uploading that review to a number of places, but I think I was finally able to succeed in doing so and still have a backup copy of it myself.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, it kind of like helped solidify a lot of thoughts I had on the assassination, which was that Oswald had done it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was one of those things that I wanted to just basically say to these people, listen to the man who's had to hear about this most of his life and just listen to him. Mm-hmm. He knows what he's talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And I think for the fourth one, I actually love the Jim Henson tribute. That was one of your best, in my opinion.
Yeah, I will go. I am kind of admitting that that's one of the ones I'm kind of a bit disappointed in, just for the fact that I wasn't able to do the ending that I wanted to do. I actually wanted to put together something where it was myself, the Ninja Cats, Genie, any other type of characters I may have had on the show up to that point, that we were all going to get together on camera and sing that final reprise of Rainbow Connection that was at the end of the Muppet movie itself. And that was one of the first times I realized that I just wasn't going to be able to get the resources and everybody together to do it. And so I had to settle for more or less playing the audio of that vision itself over the end credits. And that was one disappointment I kind of had. But outside of that, I would like to think that I probably did the best iteration I could of paying tribute to the man, because that was probably one of the first people that I had to deal with the fact that someone who had been an integral part of my entertainment as a childhood had passed away. I was 11 years old when Jim Henson died. And remember, it was just at the time that the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie was released in theaters, which of course he designed the costumes of the Turtles themselves. And really, I'll still say this, for at least those first 2 movies, no one's really been able to do a better job since then, in my take, to be able to convert them into actual live action suits for both of those movies. It's still incredibly impressive work, and I think a lot of people, I believe me, I've watched other guys' reaction videos to that movie in particular, and everyone seems to be really amazed and blown away as to how well those designs and costumes worked.
Yeah, it still blows my mind how well they work. And I think the one final one, and it's a 2-for-1 deal again. This time around, it's both shows that probably annoyed you: Glee and Scream Queens.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if I really knew what I was getting into once I made the first 2 seasons of Glee. And believe me, if I had ended it on season 2, I might have been able to maintain a lot of my sanity. But when I did, I suddenly realized I just can't stop here. And maybe if I keep it to one particular season a year for the rest of it, I might be able to pace it down. And Glee is probably the one that really it's a disappointment, because like I said, season 2 of Glee probably at least was just the right kind of insane that someone like me can really appreciate. And unfortunately, the remaining seasons first just went way overboard in the dramedy type of stuff, and then the later seasons practically went into Lost territory with how the storylines themselves went off the rails. So that was what kind of disappointed me. For what it's worth, Scream Queens, you know what? It's one of those things where it's just so bat insane that it is. I would almost say that Scream Queens could be the epitome of so bad it's good. That's pretty much all what the most I can say about it. Because yes, everything is utterly ridiculous, but you just know that it was supposed to be ridiculous. And they just absolutely ran with the lunacy they were creating. And there was at least more focus on that, on just trying to make it as much of ramping up the insanity that the horror genre can be. And that's why, you know what, it's one of those things that that show could absolutely, I can understand it being a guilty pleasure for a lot of people.
Yeah, but I gotta tell you, I watched both seasons when they came out, and I was like, I can't believe they did this or did that, because quite honestly, they could have done better and kept things going. And with Scream Queens, but as for Glee, I mean, I had heard of this show, and believe it or not, my older nieces, Madison and Mallory, they had talked to me about this show, and I decided, okay, I'd give it a shot. Watched a few minutes, and I was like, but yeah, this is not going to be entertaining, except for just the music portions, the songs that they perform. So there was that. But once those later years happened where everything went off the rails, it was partly because Corey Monteith, may he rest in peace, he had died, and I kind of had to say to myself, okay, this show, if anyone does review it, they have to walk on eggshells with what's been happening lately behind the scenes.
It is kind of very tragic to hear just how many people who are involved with that show have been involved in tragedies and other terrible incidents that could just very depress you and stuff. I'm going to say that much.
Yeah.
But yeah, but the other side of Scream Queens, I could understand why a lot of people were probably disappointed that it never got at least a third season. Kind of similar to why I've always been disappointed that we never got a third season of Sekirei, more or less. But yeah. But other than that, I guess the only thing to say here is to James, definitely congratulations on continuing in this racket for 10 years. As someone who's kept it going for 13 and counting, I could definitely tell you how much of a crazy train ride, but an enjoyable train ride, it can definitely be.
Yeah, it can be a fun ride.